welcome everyone to the Global Fashioning Assembly. We're imagining a decentralized footwear industry today, and I'm really excited to be the host. For anyone that doesn't know, most people do, but my name's Ariel. I'm the founder of Cobbled Goods, slow fashion platform dedicated to showcasing small independent brands around the world. So we'll do a quick intro for anyone not familiar with the Global Fashioning Assembly. It's a biennial series of mostly online events held throughout October this year. Each event is hosted by different communities around the world, and they all share a focus on decentralizing and decolonizing the fashion system. So it's really about bringing together a diversity of people at the grassroots level and giving voice to those outside the centers of the fashion industry. So we have 18 events, 18 more events happening. We are the second event, and there was one this past Tuesday. So there's a quick flip through of some other events you might be interested in joining. You can see them all on Eventbrite. And you can see which ones are in your time zone and in your language. And one thing to note is that each event will have a sharing council at the end. These are a space for everyone, for all the participants, and as well as the audience to connect, share your struggles, your ideas, and bond as well. So there's four intentions to keep in mind when we get to that at the end of today's session. So that would be to speak with and not at each other, to acknowledge our shared purpose, to critique ideas and not people, and to avoid assumptions and respect everyone's individual experiences. So with that, I'm excited to announce our speakers and participants that I'm very grateful, have agreed to join me today. So we have Tansy Hoskins. She's an award-winning author and journalist with a focus on footwear specifically. We have Lily Dreyer, founder of Bear Upcycled. We have Sven Siegel, founder of the Better Shoes Foundation. We have Chandni Batra, founder of A Blunt Story, and Lot Mulder and Stefan Wobin from Nooch Footwear. And that'll be followed by myself. So to give you a little overview of our agenda, we're going to start with a little grounding in the Canadian context. Cobbled Goods, as the host of this event, is representing Canada, and so we want to share a little bit about where we're coming from. Then we'll follow that with Tansy Hoskins' overview of the current state of footwear and get a look from her firsthand experience visiting places and also research and writing on the topic. Then we'll get into the speculative fiction portion of the event where we'll hear from each of our speakers and hopefully stretch our imaginations about what this alternative world might look like. We'll have a quick break to stretch our legs a bit, and then we're going to get into some reflections of the exploration portion, and then we'll have the sharing council. So to give you a bit of a background on the Canadian context, the climate impacts from a destabilization of the Earth system is being felt in my backyard. This is a map of a heat dome we had a couple years ago where it reached over 40 degrees for weeks on end. And I'm located right on this big red island here. The heat that we've been having is also causing a lot of forest fires. We've had towns burning, lives lost just from the heat, as well as other destructive weather, such as floods, washing out some of our main highways and flooding farms. So I bring this up because at the same time that we have all this happening right in front of us, we also have business as usual continuing. And it kind of makes you wonder how can you explain that if we're continuing to invest in oil and gas pipelines to export more carbon emissions. We have a coal port that's actually ramping up exports of coal. A lot of them are coming from the US, because the US has banned it on their coastal states. We also continue extractive clear-cut logging practices of what little remains of our old forests. And this is where it connects for me to the fashion and footwear industry, is that there's patterns of power that are holding this business as usual in place, even as the alarm bells start ringing. So two of those things I'd like to just touch on is one, extraction. And maybe the best example of it where I am is the forestry industry. We're a major exporter of wood products here. Um, but most of it is done through clear-cut logging because that's most economical. And this is a map showing you just how much logging has been done in my region. So all the light greenish yellow area has been cut at one point in time. And that was about 10 years ago, and now there's even less. So what happens when the forests are cut is it actually increases the fire risk. And to the extent that combined with fire suppression practices, clear cutting and increased heat, our forests have become a net emitter of carbon rather than a sink of carbon. Pretty worrying stuff. In addition, the other factor keeping things as they are is the concentration of ownership. Currently, there's 10 brands or 10 companies that control most of the logging industry. And this is basically the exact same types of owners that control the footwear industry. It's billionaires and big finance. And when they have a very good knack for when there is someone questioning or resisting their extractive practice, such as, we shouldn't be logging so much, then they start blaming, pitting the workers against the planet, saying that, well, there's mills closing, people are losing their jobs, we can't do that. So I think that might come up later today as well. So with that little detour, I want to jump back into the footwear side and let Tansy Hoskins give us a bit of a dive into the underbelly of the footwear industry.
Thank you, Ariel. That was that's a very sort of sobering and grounding start. And as someone who writes books, I really hate hearing about the like deforestation, because obviously, working in a sort of paper-based medium. But yes, thank you so much. And thank you to the Global Fashioning Assembly for inviting me here today. Thank you to Sweater for doing all the tech support as well. And I'm just really glad to be here. So my name is Tansy Hoskins, and I'm here because I'm the author of this book, Footwork: What Your Shoes Tell You About Globalization, which has also just recently been translated into Japanese and Korean and Italian, if people are interested in getting a copy at all. So because this is like a storytelling event, I wanted to start by just like having us use our imagination to picture the origin of shoes, because the connection between human beings and shoes is something quite special. I mean, humans are the only known species that actually use shoes as protection from the cold or from dangerous ground. And their creation is linked to our evolution as a species and has had a fundamental impact on how we have traveled about the planet. Over hundreds of millions of years, the human body evolved from that of our primate forebears, and we began to support our weight by walking on 2 feet rather than 4 feet. And we started walking and running around in an upright position rather than being on all fours. And this placed a lot of strain on our feet until eventually one of our long lost ancestors had the bright idea of wrapping a bit of bark perhaps around her feet. Maybe she wanted to run a bit faster after the things she was hunting, or she needed to run away from predators, or she needed to avoid poisonous bites or stings, or maybe she was migrating across ice caps or deserts and looking for new places to live. And there's an anthropologist called Eric Trinkus, and he has determined that human beings started wearing shoes about 40,000 years ago. And these were shoes that were made from bark and reed and cowhide, and they were literally invented at the dawn of human history, and they have been with us ever since. And for tens of thousands of years, shoes remained these very humble objects. They were made locally, they were made cheaply, they were made by community shoemakers. But very early on, shoes also did become quite quickly associated with magic. And within practically every culture, from ancient China, Native American, Javanese, Russian, Zulu, Persian, you find these stories, um, generally around a feisty young woman who's aided by her shoes to raise her up out of her social station to, to a new life. The classic one being the story of Cinderella. But it's not just Cinderella. We have Hermes with his winged sandals. There's Dorothy in her ruby slippers. There were the 7 league boots. So where you find shoes, you often find magic. And yet, of course, what we are here today to talk about is the fact that shoes are not magic. Shoes are pieces of plastic and leather and rubber and foam and metal, all of which have been tightly bonded or stitched together. So, what we are going to be doing today, and what I think we must always do, is ask our shoes like the real questions, and listen to the stories that they can tell us, and not just listen to the the fairy tales and the stories that have been written about them, and which brands continue to write about them. Because whilst the design of a shoe, as literally a covering for a foot that doesn't reach above the ankle, has not changed very much, the production of shoes in the 21st century and their impact on the world around us is utterly unrecognizable from ancient times. And no matter how much the shoe industry would love us to believe that shoes just appear magically out of a puff of pink smoke, on the contrary, the footwear industry is a mighty industrial monster that in 2019 produced 66.6 million pairs of shoes every day. Shoes were amongst the first objects to undergo globalized production, and they represent now the interdependencies and the injustices that shape our world. And 66.6 million pairs of shoes a day adds up to a total of 24.3 billion. This figure has slightly decreased recently. It was around 22.4 billion pairs of shoes in 2023. And if you are wondering like where these shoes are made of, the short answer is China. So China produces approximately 60 to 65% of all shoe production, and there is no other country that comes close to rivaling this figure. But other key producing countries are Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, India, Pakistan, Mexico, Brazil. More recently, Ethiopia has been established as a shoemaking hub, basically because brands spend their time searching for lower and lower labor costs. And in Ethiopia, the baseline minimum wage for the sector is around $26 a month. Eastern Europe, again, for those of us here in Europe, Eastern Europe is a key production site for shoes that are then exported to the rest of Europe. And, if any of us take a look at the shoes that we own, that maybe we're wearing at the moment or that are in our cupboards, we will see these shoe labels that represent these real stories. The other thing that represents shoes is the way that shoe supply chains are so long and complex and international, and very often very, very hard to follow and monitor. And this is because a single shoe can be made from 30 to 40 different component parts. And when we're talking about the plastics, these are coming from fossil fuels, creating foams that can last up to 1,000 years, possibly more. We haven't had 1,000 years of monitoring them yet in landfill. But it's my belief that there is one material in particular that requires special attention, and that we must be extremely conscious of. And that material is, of course, leather, because leather supply chains are a disaster from start to finish. And whilst people might think, okay, my shoes don't have anything to do with, for example, the Amazon rainforest being cut down. But the unfortunate thing is that our shoes have everything to do with the Amazon rainforest being cut down, and the Amazon rainforest being a wondrous place, a place that houses 10% of the world's known species, with the Amazon River running for 6,600 kilometers, a river and a rainforest that are known as the lungs of the world. And yet the Amazon rainforest is being cut down, with the number one cause of Amazon deforestation being cattle farming. This cattle farming, behind the words cattle farming, is billions of animals who are bred, cruelly mistreated, and then horrifically slaughtered in order to create meat and leather. And I think it's important to point out that there is no way to humanely slaughter an animal that does not want to be killed. Of course, once an animal has been killed, once a cow has been killed, what you would have if you didn't do anything with that cow is a pile of rotting flesh and rotting skin. And so, in order for it to be prevented from rotting, it goes through currently an intensive chemical process. And one country that I have done a fair bit of research in and interviewed a lot of people who are working on this topic. For Bangladesh, the chemical process has spelt the chemical process within the tannery sector has spelt absolute disaster. And the tannery industry there created the fifth most polluted place on the planet. And if you've ever been to Dhaka, the capital, and seen the Buriganja River, its waters do run black. And one of the key chemicals that's causing this issue, because it's used to tan leather, is chromium, including chromium-6. And if anyone has seen the classic film Erin Brockovich, you'll know it as well as hexavalent chromium. Also sulfur dioxide, formic acid, and ammonium chloride. And so great are the dangers in this process that one study found that Bangladeshi tannery workers had a 90% chance of being dead by the age of 50. Literally because from a very young age, people are working with these chemicals up, with their bare hands. They are in them up to their knees, up to their waist sometimes, and they are breathing in the fumes that come off these chemicals all the time. And and all of this is literally so that shoe brands can source what gets called cheap leather, although we cannot consider something cheap if somebody has died to make it. And so that is the reality of the leather industry. Workers with a 90% chance of being dead by the age of 50, and the beautiful, or once beautiful, Buriganja River being declared biologically dead as well. And this is why I argue that we have to listen to more than just fairy tales when it comes to our shoes. We have to interrogate shoes, and we have to interrogate these supply chains and reveal the stories about where they've actually come from. This leather from Brazil, that then ends up in Bangladesh, is all being produced for export, and it fills the shops and the powerful brands of Europe, America, and the UK. So going back to the sort of, the idea of shoes and stories, I think it's interesting to imagine, what our shoes would tell us if they could talk. Would they tell us about these 66.6 million other pairs of shoes that were created on the same day as them? Would they tell you about the harsh life of Chinese factory workers or Macedonian factory workers? Would they tell you about leather workers wading through poison? And would you want to really listen to these stories? And I think one of the worst stories your shoes might tell you is, what if your shoes wanted to tell you a story about migration, but this time driven by terror and loss? And would we really want to know where our shoes have come from? Because one of the things that I ended up covering, I didn't expect to cover this in my book Footwork, but was connected to the war that broke out in Syria in 2011, when millions of people fled across the border into Turkey. which is a key producer of clothes and shoes. And over half of the 2.5 roughly million employees who work in Turkey's textile, clothing, and footwear industry are informal workers. And many, many, many of the Syrian refugee families who ended up in Turkey, just in order to have a roof over their head and put food on the table, many of them ended up as these informal workers, and many of their children also ended up as informal workers in the footwear industry in Turkey. With the result that Syrian refugee children as young as 6 were found stitching shoes together in Turkey. And we're talking about, children working from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., kids working with toxic glues, like cutting knives. Anyone here who works with the construction of shoes knows that none of the tools involved are suitable for children to have, the flammable solvents as well. And there's no garment factories, there's no shoe factories that are good places really for like adults to be, let alone children. So the physical, emotional, and sometimes sexual abuse that takes place in these workplaces was being and is being meted out on children as well. And we get back to the fact of like, why was this happening? And it was happening because the children can be hired for lower wages than the adults, and taking home a wage of sometimes as low as £25 a month. And it's really important again to note that these were shoes for export. This was not shoes just for like the Turkish market. Not that that would make it okay, but these were shoes that were coming to the UK, they were coming to Germany, they were coming to Italy. And again, shoes represent that incredibly cruel irony, is that all these families wanted was to cross borders to find somewhere safe, but Europe was not welcoming them. But Europe was happy to welcome the shoes that they were making. So the flow of capital, the flow of products was allowed, but these children were not allowed to cross the border. And as as we see the climate crisis intensify, we will only see this kind of refugee crisis become more and more intense. And the stories that our shoes would be able to tell us, if we listen to them, will become more and more alarming like this. And of course, these are all stories that are obscured. It's like billions of dollars go into obscuring these stories by sticking branded labels on them and having celebrity endorsements and like beautiful fancy adverts. But I hope what we will all do today and will continue to do is never to lose sight of the reality of our shoes, and and to continue to fight back against the issues of overproduction and environmental destruction, these floods of chemicals, and the appalling treatment of people who are stitching together this world that we are taking for granted. And just to conclude, I think, and I hope in some of our stories and going forward, we will continue to ask, like, who is this system really working for? Is this a system designed to feed, shelter, and enrich people's lives? Are we moving in harmony with the biosphere, or is this system been designed for something completely different? And I believe there's a lot of very big questions about capitalism, but sometimes it is the simplest questions that just hold the key. Is it worth destroying the rainforest to make trainers? Is it right that factories churning out over 24 billion pairs of shoes, yet wealth is so unequally distributed that tens of thousands of kids walk to school barefoot and and get sick doing that? Should people tanning leather have a life expectancy of 50? And I think if we know in our hearts, and I'm sure that all of us do, if we know in our hearts that the answer to these questions is no, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in a system which says that the answer to those questions is yes? So thank you very much, Ariel.
Thank you so much for that. I think, yeah, that was very grounding as well, bringing us quite visually to what's happening in these different parts of the world through the extractive processes. And I think, yeah, what really hits home for me is the obscuring what's going on through quite a complex and sophisticated and kind of dispersed tools from the branding to the lobbying, and there's just so many layers to it, that I think that is really something I hope we can dig into a bit more as we go on further. But that's going to do it for, I think, the sobering half of this exercise, at least most of it. We are going to move into the the speculative fiction aspect. So that will be the fashion fictions workshop. Um, this is based off a model created by Dr. Amy Twigger-Holroyd, and she's actually with us here today. We'll introduce her in a second. She'll be sharing a little bit more about what it's all about.
Thank you, Ariel. Hi, everybody. It's great to see this event taking place, and I'm really excited to see what comes up. So just to give a little bit of context about fashion fictions. So this is a project that I started about 4 years ago, building on, I guess, about 15 years of work before that in broadly in kind of fashion and sustainability. And I kind of got to a point where I was thinking, kind of looking around and wondering how I could be helpful I've got a background in designing and making, and I'm an academic researcher at Nottingham School of Art and Design. I was looking around at sort of how awful things are, as Tansy has just very soberingly sort of and articulated. So yeah, the environmental and social impacts of the fashion sector and the growth-centric economic model that underpins that. And I guess I felt from conversations I had in lots of different settings that a space was really needed to kind of really support people to be able to imagine alternatives. So I think I was thinking of the fighting back that I might be able to support being a kind of fighting back based on imagination. So I was thinking about designing a space where the idea of alternatives and radical alternatives to the kind of business as usual status quo don't get shut down immediately by that critique that was very familiar to me of like, well, that's just not going to happen. Nice idea, but come on, let's be realistic. That's not going to happen. And it was like, let's just stop that for a bit and see what happens if we don't have that voice saying, well, that's not realistic. So I had a go at kind of creating a structure for collective imagination in terms of kind of fashion systems. And the structure, so that is the project essentially, and the project is an open invitation. So anyone is invited to be involved in fashion fictions in any way that they would like to. Everything has Creative Commons licenses, so the stories and things that people come up with, and also the structure itself can be adapted and built on and remixed and used. So there are 3 stages, and that was what Ariel had on the slide. I don't know if you want to stick it back up again. There's 3 stages, and all 3 stages coexist at all times. Anyone can do any stage. But the first stage is writing short outlines of fictional parallel worlds where people live differently with their clothes and shoes. And these are just 100-word brief outlines, kind of written sketches. And I really encourage people to be kind of playful and take an idea for a walk, really. It's not kind of like a fully costed manifesto for the next election. It's kind of like, have an idea. What if it was like this? I don't know, let's write it in 100 words and let's play with the idea. And then at stage 2, usually different person or group of people will come along and pick up one of these fictions and build on it. They'll develop their own understanding of that parallel world and excuse me, create something that comes from that world. So an image or an object, imagining they've stepped through a portal and gone there, taken a photograph or picked something up to bring back and show other people what this alternative reality is like. And then the third stage is we find ways to enact the worlds and actually try to make them real. So we find ways to kind of act with our bodies as people would act with their bodies in this parallel world, on the basis that doing reveals things that thinking about doing doesn't quite reach. But all of the stages really have a lot of value in kind of thinking us and moving ourselves towards alternate realities and seeing what that does to how we then look back at the real world. And the underlying purpose is to try to create an expanded sense of possibility so that we do quieten down those voices that say that's not going to happen. And I've seen people shift from, oh, I wish that would happen, to like almost a hands on hips. Why isn't it already like this? And it's that kind of that shift that I think is really important to underpin any kind of action. And also kind of injecting new stories into the world. So new stories, new reference points, new things that you go, well, that was a bit of a crazy fiction, but actually there's something in that we could really get to work on. So that's the structure of the project. As I say, it's an open invitation, and the success of the project is entirely driven by the brilliance and creativity of the thousands of people who have taken part all over the world and have come up with fictions and come up with ways of doing things like this event today. So I'm really happy to be here and to see how it unfolds.
Thank you, Amy, for creating this. I find it a very powerful exercise, and I think really important as well. So without further ado, let's jump into stage one of the fashion fiction. So this is the world that we're working with. It's world 255. And in this world, large fast fashion corporations have been dissolved and replaced by small businesses. And it branched off from our reality during the pandemic. There was a viral reporting series that exposed Nike's abuse of corporate power, its unpaid wages, its plans to continue expanding production in the face of the climate and biodiversity crises. It triggered a global social tipping point on the need to move beyond the corporate model, and a new consensus formed around addressing corporate power through one simple idea that everyone could rally behind: limiting business to a maximum size. So a global movement to de-resource Nike and other large extractive footwear brands cascades across the apparel industry, and people withdraw their spending and investment, forcing these companies to wind down their operations. So that is the premise that we're working with, and we're going to be exploring. So now we will have the rest of our speakers take turns, about 12 minutes or so, each sharing how they've interpreted this world following the fashion fictions model. So first, I would like to invite Lily.
Yes, thank you, Ariel. Yeah, so this was a really, really exciting exercise for me to start with. And I think World 255, the outline of it is perfect for just getting the idea started. So first, I thought I'll just do a very short introduction of me and my company. So my name is Lily. I'm from Denmark, so representing Denmark here. Don't know if anyone else is from Denmark. And I'm a huge textile waste nerd. So that's also why on the picture that I'm sitting on a big pile of textile waste. And in 2018, I wrote my thesis about textile waste and textile upcycling as a solution to this, and how we can make it scalable. And that was actually what then led me to start VAR, my company, when I returned from England, where I did my master's. When I went back to Denmark, I started the company. And our first product was these upcycled sneakers that you can see on the picture, and they're made from discarded jeans and workwear. So kind of combining this aspect of upcycling, and then making sneakers as sustainable as possible that we can make them. So that was a little bit about me and my company, and then we'll get going into World 255. So first, before we dive into the world, I wanted to share my thoughts behind the world. So as I've understood this parallel universe, the Nike incident happened in 2021 during the pandemic, which led to this split where we have our world and then we have this parallel universe called World 255. But that means that a lot of the things that we're dealing with before 2021 are still relevant both in our world, but also in World 255. So that is, for example, some of the issues with the waste. For example, the fact that we have already produced enough clothing to dress the next 6 generations, and the fact that we just have massive amounts of waste and textile waste in particular. the difference is that in our world, this is seen as a problem, where in world, oh, now I wrote 251. In 255, it's seen as a resource, and not just as a resource, it's actually the main input material for new products. And I don't know if you can see the little guy in the right corner. I can't. He's gone for me because your faces are there. But he's called Tom, and he's the guy that I met when I traveled to World 255. So he'll be the one guiding us around this world. So yeah, a little introduction to World 255. So if we start in the left upper corner. So apart from the fact that there is a maximum size of companies, that they're limited to a maximum size, there is also a cap on resource usage, both for companies and for individuals. So this has led to, if we go to the right upper corner, the fact that waste has become a very valuable resource. So instead of it being a problem, as I said, it's actually most of our products are made from waste. The difference is that, like, with the big companies, they can't really use waste because it's a chaotic input material. It's unstandardized, so it's difficult to work with. But now that we moved into a world where it's small companies, it's actually, we have the opportunity to actually create a system that works around waste. So we can use waste and use all the benefits there are from like having products that are already made and using them into making new products. On the other hand, if we look down in the left bottom corner, going from like these big companies to much smaller companies, another opportunity has also arisen for much more self-production. So instead of the fact that it's just companies creating our products, it's actually ourselves that are creating a lot of our own products, which also means that these like long supply chains that Tansy was also talking about, they're becoming much shorter. And instead of it being all over the world, we're creating shoes, for example, much more locally, and we are a big part of the production ourselves. So all of this leads to the fact that we have in World 255, we actually created a whole system around using waste to create our new products. I hope that kind of makes sense. So one of the questions was, what surprised you about entering this parallel universe? And one of the main things that surprised me when I first came to World 255 was the fact that, like, right now, I think in our world, when I look around, when I'm on the subway or wherever I am, I feel like people are wearing a lot of the same things. When I look around, a lot of people are wearing the same shoes from the big brands because that's what we're being told to do. We're being told that this is fashionable, so you should wear these Adidas or Nike sneakers or whatever it is. We're in World 250, and Tom, by the way, is not a fan of this, which is why he looks very unsatisfied. But on the right side, this is World 255. I see people wearing much more like diverse sneakers. Like there's no like, this is the brand, so this is what everyone else is wearing. It's actually just a lot of different types of sneakers. And one thing is like what I see and how it looks like. Another thing is kind of like the stories behind these sneakers and how they're actually made. So that Tom will help us kind of explore how many of these sneakers are actually made, because Tom is a facilitator of this new way of making sneakers. So he has his own remaker workshop. So after 2021, where the Nike incident happened, he bought an old shoe repair shop and he made it into a shoe remaker workshop. So that means he still have some of the equipment needed to make shoes, like a stitching machine and like a sewing machine and a sole molds. And he also bought a 3D printer, so he can like 3D print soles, for example. And the main input to this remaker workshop is, of course, waste and not new resources. So that's, for example, like byproducts from production from other companies, or just like waste coming from all these different waste sorters that are a lot of in this parallel universe. And then people come in. For example, this woman can come in. She can also bring her own waste, and then she can make her own sneakers using the tools in the workshop. And Tom is, of course, there to help. And the result of this is shoes that are made to this person's preferences, and not because of like, this is the trend that it's slim soles or no soles or big soles or whatever it is. It's just what fits best to that person's foot. And then there's no big brands. It's just that person's own shoes. So that's kind of like how the system works with like self, like the people actually being part of the production process. And then we were asked to make an artifact. So I have a diary entrance from Tom's logbook because he's really passionate about what he does. So he also writes like a log book. So he had a customer in the shop, and he wrote a little like passage about that. So I'm just gonna read that out loud. Okay, today was one of those days that makes running this workshop feel like magic. A young girl, probably around 16, came in with a bag full of what looked like scrap. Old jeans, old soles from an old pair of shoes, and even some worn out curtains. I could see the hesitation in her eyes at first, like she wasn't sure if she belonged here. But once I told her we could turn all of that into a pair of custom sneakers, she lit up like a lantern. It always amazes me how quickly people catch on to the idea of creating something new from waste. She dove right in, cutting, shaping, and stitching with more enthusiasm than I've seen in a while. The old denim from her jeans became the outer fabric. The old soles found new life as her new soles. She even braided pieces of curtain to add as laces, which turned out beautifully. Her excitement was infectious, and by the end of it, she was practically bouncing around in her new self-made sneakers. She walked out of here proud, and I couldn't help but feel proud too. Another day, another reminder that this place is more than just a workshop. It's where people realize their potential, where waste transforms not just into shoes, but into something much more meaningful. That was the diary passage. And I also, I don't know if I should show it because like I had made like a cool artifact at home, but now I'm in another city because we have a market that we have to be at, and I forgot the artifact. So I made another artifact this morning, and it's not cool, but I made this one. So this is a pair of sneakers, and it was supposed to be like Tom that had made like a replica of the sneakers that that girl made because he was so excited about them. This one is just made from a to-go cup, like a cardboard to-go cup with newspaper around it. So there you go. Yes, next slide. Okay, so just to round it up, kind of what is this? We had this matrix that you sent out, Ariel, that I guess is a part of the framework by you, Amy. Kind of like reflecting on what is there an abundance of what is scarce. And I think this, like the vertical line, is actually almost the same as in our world. There is, we have scarce resources, but we have an abundance of waste. But in this world, 255, that means that what is celebrated is uniqueness and creativity and actually using this waste, where what is stigmatized is kind of the wastefulness and of course corporate greed and these like big companies just creating more waste. So that was my reflections on World 255.
Thank you so much, Lily. That was an amazing tour into World 255. I felt like I was there. That was great. Next, I think we're going to have the Nooch team, Stefan and Lot.
Yeah, first of all, big thanks to GFA and also Ariel and your magnificent mustache for inviting us to take part in this gathering. We're Stefan and Lotte. We're co-founders at Nooch. Nooch Footwear. We create plant-based and fully biodegradable sneakers. And we're but a small company. We're just taking our first steps into this world and an industry that Tansy so grimly outlined just now. But we're trying to do the best we can and do things as thoughtfully as we can. And one of the most important things of running an ethical company is to ensure that it's an integral part of its excuse me, of its DNA. And a way to do this is to have a system of governance in place. And Stefan will now explain a little bit more on how this works.
Yeah. So hi, Stefan. Cool to see you all. Pretty excited actually to talk about a topic that is often seems as so boring, like governance. Then you think of those boring boardrooms and rules, but actually they really matter, I think, because you can see them as the behind the scenes director. They really shape how we build our businesses. And yeah, if you look at how we build our businesses, and that's always what's been puzzling me. I always think like, okay, if people are good by nature, how then do we build those systems that has such an awful impact, actually, as well, Tansy also described. So really started thinking like, hey, on that part, hey, if we look at governance part, kan je deze doen? I lost my notes.
Oh,
No
sorry.
problem. So if you look at the governance part, hey, how do we structure actually companies? And if you look at that core part, hey, that could make a difference in the outcome of that one as well. So actually, what is the current state? Well, current state, if you look at who's the boss, who makes those decisions, then we usually think of the traditional CEO. We could also describe him as the shareholders' best friend, or is he an enemy of the planet? It's usually short-term focused. It's like really quarterly focus, short-term gain, long-term pain. And we thought like, what if we could appoint like a different CEO? What if it's not like the traditional CEO as we know it, but what if we could make Mother Nature CEO? How would she run a company? If you start playing with that idea, that completely shifts things. So then instead of going from quarterly reports, you start thinking in much more long term, maybe even 7 generations thinking. Okay, if I create something now, it has an impact, but what is the impact on that generation that comes after that, and after that, and after that, and after that? So that idea that some fuel cells, they take 1,000 years or even longer, we don't know yet. That idea, yeah, then you think of 7 generations. If you start playing that back, then I'm thinking like, all right, imagine the Vikings, that they created all this kind of stuff, or call it like crap, that we have to deal with now. So yeah, we don't want to leave that behind. So that would a thing that Mother Nature would never do. She would do that differently. She would also not opt for monoculture, but much more for diversity. So she has like a whole different set of principles. And that's what we try to do in our daily practice as well. If we make decisions and that with Lotte, we talk, hey, what should we do? Go left or right? Then we always know like, hey, what would Mother Nature do? And then suddenly the answer becomes much more obvious. Not only profit driven, it's much more about purpose and being mission aligned and all those kind of things. So to really sum that up a bit for us, I try really to make it like a contrast. And it's not at all CEOs are bad persons, although there has been a research that 21% of them, they have psychopathic traits. That's to do because, hey, to be on top of this game, you have to be very charismatic, but also a bit like lack of empathy, because you have to make like cold, rational decisions in this traditional system. That I think we need to rethink and that we need to flip. So instead of traditional serving shareholders, hey, what if you put the mission first? The mission is the boss. What if you would go for infinite growth? Hey, would be cool if we could respect boundaries. So, hey, set a cap on the resources that you can use. Set a limit on the size of your company. Really interesting thought process. So short term, hey, let's think in 7 generations. And instead of exploitation, hey, what if we start thinking of protecting the planet and also the people and all the living beings, actually? So it's much more than that. So who would you like to appoint as CEO of your company? Pretty obvious, right? And that got me thinking, but why then isn't, if we think this is the boss, why isn't this the case? So then you start digging a bit deeper, like, but who is actually the boss? So who is actually appointing the CEO, because he's not the boss, he's just the highest manager. So then you start thinking, and hey, but then how is that actually operated? And there are actually like really interesting new model, or new model is actually pretty old already, but it's interesting to look into that. But on the left side, you have those shareholders, and they're actually how it usually in the legal structure, how it's usually operated is the more money you bring in, the more voting power you have. Money equals votes. And then you can really decide. In that sense, you can decide like, hey, who will be running my company? Because you have invested your money in it, so it's your company. So you can then decide like, hey, who will be CEO? And usually, what guy gets appointed? It's the one that brings in short-term profits. Someone that gives you like a quick return. And because you're like disconnected actually from all the externalities, you just focus on your bottom line. That's usually how it now goes. So the company is not protected, the mission is not protected. It's usually a way to extract resources, turn that into profit, put that in the back of the shareholders' pockets. And it's like a system let's keep perpetuating. And it's like, yeah, it's all over there. So that's our norm. But there are like, and I think Patagonia is the most recent example that did this. But Bosch, for example, you probably know it from the car parts or from the washing machine, like this big German brand. They have like a different model called steward ownership. And then you turn it around with steward ownership. You could really appoint like a Mother Earth as CEO. And the big disconnect, what if we say like, okay, you have money and you have votes, so not more money. Hey, you could say not equals more votes. So yeah, you can invest in a company, and if that company gets like a return, you get your share return, and that's something that you can cap as well. But that doesn't have to say that because you brought in money, you have more voting power. And this is actually what Patagonia did. When Yvon Chouinard said like, well, I donate my company to Mother Earth. Well, what did he did? If you look in the governance, in the legal part, hey, there's one Patagonia Trust Foundation. There they have all the voting power. So 100% of the votes, they go to that foundation. And the purpose of that foundation is actually to protect the company, to ensure that it never can be bought, for example, to put the mission always first, to set in maybe some governance principles in place, like how do we run this organization? So that's all there, and it's disconnected from the money part. And that's like another foundation. Hey, they get 100% of all the profits that this company's made, and they reinvest it actually in all kinds of projects to protect Mother Earth. So you could have like this disconnect. And I see this model as very promising as well for, hey, if you want to create that world 255, that's a bit my key takeaway. Hey, let's look at how we structure those businesses, how we govern that. And if you set up something new, hey, make sure you do that with this steward ownership idea in mind. Because once you start and you get investors on board, could be very difficult to change that part if you don't do it from the start. So that's like a call out that I want to make here as well. And with that, I think
Yeah.
we started playing with that idea.
Yeah, so now that Stefan has outlined how we can govern things differently, I'd like to sort of take you guys with us to our alternative reality. To get a sort of a glimpse into what this small area would be like in everyday life, and we chose a world 269, and the vegans among us will perfectly know why we chose this number, which is also a very integral part of our company. So I'd like you to picture that we all work together at a footwear cooperative, and this is not your normal working place, but rather a place where our voices are heard, and we're actually an essential part of the decision-making process. Our products are all ethically made and under good working conditions, and only using materials that are cruelty-free and safe to biodegrade. And at this place, our work isn't just about hitting targets or clocking in and out, but rather we're helping to build a future that really values the planet and every living being on it. So this, knowing this gives us, knowing that our efforts matter, gives us a real sense of belonging. So after work, we decide to unwind a little bit and go to a restaurant called the Green Thread Kitchen. And this is the communal restaurant. Can you go one slide back, please? Yeah, thanks. A space where, just like the rest of the cooperative that we live in, they have also appointed Mother Nature as their CEO. So the values that we all believe in, they really come together in the food system as well. So the dishes created here are actually not that different from the shoes that we create, because everything is made with care, without harm, and always in harmony with the planet. So we sit down at a table by the window and we look out onto this big, luscious communal food forest. And we're also surrounded by people that are all mission aligned, from the teachers joining us for dinner that have set in place an alternative educational system, to people working in the medical profession and every other industry that you can think of that is needed to provide for a community like this. So yeah, let's see what's on the menu. And this week's special is the Soul to Soul Supper. And let's have a drink first, because that's a kombucha made by the Solar Brew Cooperative, completely solar powered. And they create their drinks with herbs and fruits grown in a greenhouse that uses compost, partially made from the bits of biodegradable sneakers and clothing that cannot be recycled anymore. Then we'll have a mushroom burger, a mycelium burger. This company doesn't only create mushrooms that we can eat, but they also have a separate section where they create mycelium that can be used for creating mushroom leather, for example, with a nice slice of vegan bacon on top. A company that creates proteins, alternative proteins, also suitable for food, but can be used to make protein silks as well, for use in the fashion industry, for example. Side dish is some sweet potatoes, grown by the Village Soil Collective. These guys ensure that the soil is restored after each harvest. And they're also part of a bigger global system that has set rules in place to take care of the soil and make sure that it's regenerated. And for dessert, some chocolate ice cream with cocoa grown in the Amazon, but by a company that makes sure that it's ethically produced and also regenerates the forest. So yeah, we can have ice cream while we're also protecting the rainforest, which is a win-win situation, if you ask me. Yeah, so as you can see, this menu isn't just about food, but it's really about a bigger picture and how it's all interconnected. And I think the best part of this is that it's not just a fantasy, because there are actually companies that are working this way already. So we know that it can be done. Yeah, so I think that's on a positive note to end there. It is possible. And yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I'm hungry now.
Thank you so much, Lot and Stefan. That was great. I I think that's a really important conversation to have about governance, and I think it's highly related to diffusing corporate power, whether it's a factor that's enabling it or if it's being enabled by a smaller business size. So I think that's really interesting. And then as well as the integration into the entire food system, another unique perspective that I thank you for bringing to the table. Next, I think we're going to have Sven.
Well, hi everyone. Yeah, I wanted to thank Ariel for bringing us all together, first of all. My background is a shoe designer, and I've been working in the industry for about 10 years. And I got really fed up about the horrible conditions that factory workers were exposed to after traveling a lot, especially to the Far East. And I decided to start my brand I developed it back in 2003 and launched it in 2006. It took me about 3 years to develop. And produce shoes the way I think should be made, with respect, first and foremost, to the factory workers, but also to the environment. And I've run this brand for about 15 years, which unfortunately went belly up during the pandemic. But to celebrate our 10th anniversary, we launched the Better Shoes Foundation, because we realized that we need something beyond our little brand that creates wonderful shoes, but then we need a bigger impact across the industry. So we created this resource for anyone, open resource that anyone can access, with the hope of sharing information to facilitate brands to move towards more sustainable practices. So yeah, that was about 8 years ago. So I've been thinking how capping business sizes will what we'll actually see in practice across the industry. And it was interesting to see Lily mention this in one of her slides. And looking at the bigger brands, almost like from a biodiversity perspective, almost like a monoculture. So you see, and it's interesting to consider that something like the 10 biggest sports brands in the world, they actually have an 80% market share. So it's no wonder that we see so many people wearing the same stuff. And what will happen if we sort of completely turn it upside down? And what impact will it make to the actual products that we see there? And the other thing about biodiversity is, so apart from sort of creating sort of a cultural biodiversity, and biodiversity in fashion, sort of in parallel to to our efforts to conserve biodiversity in nature. It's interesting to sort of witness that in our current world, almost no brand, especially in shoes, are sort of taking biodiversity seriously. I think most brands, if they even working towards sustainability, I think they tend to sort of look at carbon emissions and reduction of carbon emissions really long term, which tend to be projections that are unrealistic, especially the way they are sort of handling their business at the moment. So yeah, there was only one brand that I'm aware of that produced a biodiversity report. And sadly, they actually closed recently. They're called Aspect Climate Projects. I don't know if you've ever come across them, but they actually closed their business, even though their website is still operating. So I think it would be interesting to have a look at what they produced. But yeah, I mean, for our purpose, I thought to sort of bring biodiversity as the main focus, and something that is currently completely not considered, and how it will affect the sort of the the variables of different types of shoes, in terms of how they look, but also how they produced. So we're likely to come up with many more ways to produce shoes which are clearly much more sustainable. And this is more about the materials and how we source materials. So currently, the vast majority of shoes, and especially sport shoes, are made out of virgin plastic, which is a huge environmental problem. And in this new world, we finally managed to ban use of virgin plastic, realizing just how toxic the stuff is, as we found it in our blood, and we realized that we have to phase it out, just like asbestos was phased out back in the 90s. So yeah, we have to start to look at other resources. So it's basically I divided it into sort of three chunks of core resources going forward, one of which is renewable. In fact, sorry, so if we're looking at bio-based materials, all of which will either be resourced from renewable resources from nature, and I'll just give a couple of examples of cork and coconut husk, or they're going to be grown in a lab, which is the biggest example is mycelium. And in terms of synthetic materials, our main resource would be landfills, which is something that was also mentioned earlier. And yeah, if we can go back to the biodiversity, actually, sorry, not necessarily the slide, but in terms of the subject, I think the beauty of biodiversity is how we look at things, how we look at the impact of our sourcing and production onto the ecology. And there's many layers of considerations that are well beyond just emissions. So, for example, if we look at sourcing a particular product like cotton, it really matters where it's sourced from and you know how the cotton was grown. So, for example, if the shoe has a label of X amount of bio-based materials, you know, you can have two products with, let's say, 70% bio-based materials, but they are unlikely to be equal in terms of their ecological impact. So this is something that we sort of so it's something that we are very quickly realizing that we have to look into those into those various impacts, like toxicity, for example. It's hardly ever discussed in sustainable terms. So yeah. So this is more about becoming more resourceful, and let me just read out this quote. It's a quote by Cornelius Schmidt, who is the co-founder and CEO of Zellerfeld. So Zellerfeld are the first commercial platform for 3D printed shoes. And he says the democratization of footwear industry through 3D printing will break down barriers to entry, allowing designer, creatives, and everyone with an idea to participate and thrive. So basically, the platform is welcomes designers to upload their design, and anyone can purchase this design by 3D printing this design, also according to their foot shape. So there's like a scan involved, and they can print it to fit their own feet. So this is also links back into the biodiversity idea, that there's like more and more designers that are can commercialize their design simply by joining one of these platforms. And the 3D printing, it's about efficiency. So it's one of the most efficient way of creating a shoe. And the other advantage of 3D printing is the fact that you can create an entire shoe with a mono material, which can then be recycled. So you can you can grind down the entire shoe, and the material will then be you can produce a filament from this material, and you can sort of 3D print a new shoe from the same shoe that has been used in the past. So this is a way to a very clean way, in a way, to sort of start a circular economy. And it's become so popular that 3D printing machines are sort of like a must-have in any sort of domestic environment. People are starting to 3D print their own shoes. And not only that, you can actually take them back to sort of a local facility, and they will turn the shoes or any other product back into filaments. So this is the image on the right there, that you can just go into the shop and you can choose various color filaments from various other polymers that you can use to print your next new pair of shoes. So yeah, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Greenwashing has been officially banned, and yeah, just like cigarettes ads. I mean, if sometimes it's like hard to imagine that we used to have, cigarettes ads been, very prominent ads, even in the cinema. This Marlboro guy, this cowboy comes to mind. But so it's hard to imagine, greenwashing being phased out, but it actually happened, and it's all thanks to legislations. Digital passports, and our ability to instantly scan a shoe and being able to see the entire supply chain, the transparency for all the materials, the breakdown of all the materials that the shoe was made in. And it's also the ability to actually compare between the sustainability standard between two different shoes, which is currently impossible. So yeah, this is a big thing that I mean, a lot of the greenwashing at the moment, as most of you will probably know, is the big brands coming out with the new sustainable products. But if you look into the breakdown of materials, you discover that only maybe 20 or 25% of the shoe has been produced with maybe recyclable content or recycled content. And so you have to ask yourself, what happened to the other 75%, and how can it possibly be sustainable if the vast majority of the materials are not? So yeah, this is a crucial turning point in the evolution of our new world. So yeah, this is going back to the sort of circular economy approach. One of the biggest trends is modular shoes, and shoes that are designed for disassembly. And what I was thinking here is that the models, so because we no longer have, two collections a year, in some cases at the moment, brands are launching a new product not just twice a year, but multiple times a year. So here we're looking at products that are sort of are well designed and are here to last. So you're looking at modular shoes that you can sort of purchase a component of the shoe. You may even be able to sort of purchase like a file to digital print it at home. But in any case, you because if the sole, for instance, is the component that wears out quickest, you'll be able to just purchase the sole itself, and because the same color might not be available the following year, so it creates this like mismatch of blocks of colors in the shoe, and it's just like turning into sort of like a new look and a trend in itself, to show that you are, you are actually wearing part of the sort of the circular economy, which is quite cool. And yeah, I was thinking that shoe parts can also become a new economy in itself, just like car parts have been an economy in the past. But instead of having huge warehouse with those shoe parts, they are 3D printed on demand. So this is another trend that's become hugely popular in our world, just because we like to preserve the stuff that we already have for as long as possible, and visible mending, which is starting to happen in clothing, but less so in footwear. But again, I thought it's can provide a very, very cool trend for people to show that they're sort of celebrating the flaws rather than hiding them. So they mend the shoes in a way that it's highly visible and can be really fun and creative as well at the same time. Yeah, so going back to circular economy, I'm basically here I'm highlighting one aspect of it, which is a complete change in a business strategy. So instead of selling shoes, you actually subscribe to shoes, and I think it works especially well for performance shoes that you need to change very frequently. So On Running have actually launched this a few months ago. This they call it the Cyclone program. So you are able to subscribe to it by paying like a monthly subscription. I think it's about 25 euros a month. And this enables you to actually send the shoes back every 6 months. The company grinds your shoes, and they send you a new pair made from the grounds of all the shoes that they collect back. So this is subscription has become really widespread for all the companies who produce running shoes and other performance shoes that require frequent change. So yeah, I think that's about it, really.
Thank you very much, Sven. I think that's a really good kind of collage of ideas and showing all the little pockets of an alternative world that already do exist. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to look at. And so we're going to have Johnny's presentation, mine, and then we're going to have a condensed kind of reflections, maybe mixed with the Sharing Council. So yeah, take it away, Johnny.
So hi everybody, I'm Chandni. We can move on to the second slide. So our brand's called A Blunt Story, and we make sandals made out of plant-based and recycled materials. The idea behind it was kind of to make a statement against big oil and all the plastics that are permeated through the industry. and waste colonization, because there's a lot of waste that pours into India from a lot of international markets. And while we know waste is an incredible resource, it should not be upon people in the global south to have to deal with, waste from other countries. So that's us. We'll just move on to the next slide. So the world that Ariel created kind of like hit close to home. It was at the time that we launched the brand as well, and people finally actually acknowledged the climate crisis. For very long before then, there was a lot of disbelief around it. I'm talking about the larger population, obviously not us change makers and independent thinkers, but the larger population, there was a lot of disbelief. But for the first time, at least here in India, it felt that people were acknowledging the climate crisis and that they were seeking another world, and that another world was possible because we were doing everything differently. So the limits of our perception and our imagination were expanded during that phase, I feel. And since then, some of it has been lost, but I hope that'll sort of, I'm excited to imagine this new world with all of you so that we can, bring that back. The excitement that was felt for the changes that were to come after COVID. So again, something that happened during COVID was, as much as we believe we need a lot of changes, and I am very much for them. In fact, we are trying to spearhead some of these changes. I also believe that we really need to take a bottom-up approach as much as a top-down approach, because most of what we imagine gets manufactured elsewhere, and a lot of it in places like India. And what happened in the global crisis, during the COVID crisis, and very close to what Ariel was saying, displaced a lot of migrant workers in India. And they were walking for days on end without food, without trains, without any access to anything, and that sort of has carried forward even up until now. So many businesses closed down. So even till now, the footwear industry in India kind of like still is, bearing repercussions of it. And I just wanted to urge everyone, when we imagine these worlds, not to leave the people the people who are actually making the shoes behind in that conversation. So we need to imagine it from their perspective too, because otherwise the trickle-down effect of something that happens, at a global scale or even at a national scale kind of trickles down to somebody somewhere making the shoes who has very little choice in the matter. Okay, so the next slide, please. So in this world, and the following slide, the now fragmented systems are now more transparent, but less organized. Obviously, now there's a lot of smaller organizations, and in each of these, because they're smaller, we are able to understand what is happening within their systems a lot more easily. Whereas when it's a very large corporation, it's hard to really connect all the dots of everything that is going on within an organization. But obviously, because they're small organizations and it's not organized the same way corporates are organized, they are less organized. And there are many brands, everyone's making up their own rules as we find our limits within a new system. The intent is clearer for each of these brands. Sadly, those shoe sizes are all over the place. So it's also the brands and the design that is happening. It's also more local in terms of design, in terms of material, in terms of consumption. So you're talking about a need-based design. What is needed in India might be very different to what is needed in Canada or elsewhere. And even aesthetically, it could be incorporating crafts from each of their local region. Consumption too, sometimes, it's quite, I mean, India's hot for most part of the year, but somehow because of this new sneaker trend and phase, everyone's suddenly wearing the it sneaker, even if they're boiling inside there, you know? So all of that, once we have many brands in, in this fragmented system, will address some of the local needs a lot better. And obviously, because larger corporations are out, the barriers are gone for smaller brands to enter, because there is space for them to, have their own little market niche, rather than, trying to compete with a large conglomerate like Nike, Adidas, or anybody else. Okay, Logomania is dead. I'm super excited about this one. Design is actually finding its roots again, and design is becoming yet again about finding solutions to our problems. It was not just Nike who died, many others died with Nike, and they left us with a lot of shoes in landfills. So the idea of flaunting capitalism with logomania now is something that is really not the aesthetic of the time. And while there is material scarcity, the creativity is rife, and innovations are coming up with, waste as a resource. They're more decentralized and they're more decolonized. And the consumer is no longer king. However, the citizen has a voice that is regarded in their rights. So, I mean, this is again, for so long, the consumer has been king because the corporates have made consumers king, and consumers have been made kings because it serves the capitalist economy for them to, keep buying more, keep purchasing more. And the fact that we were all once citizens who shared, our commons has just been disregarded in the last few decades. So I think in this new world that, that paradigm shift begins to happen. And the citizens, obviously, when the citizen awakening happens, we are now designing with biodiversity in mind. We're designing for the waste pickers. We're designing for example, fish in my case, because I'm a diver, and I really was concerned by all the microplastics and the plastics that we saw. So we are designing bearing in mind much larger ecosystem that appeals to each of us actually individually. And one person could be doing one thing and another person could be doing another. And we're obviously no longer serving the interests of shareholder or the consumer, rather of a little bit selfishly of ourselves, but we are the community rather than, rather than say corporations or governments or whatever. This is community. And if we serve our own interests, we are likely to, be able to even cater to waste pickers and fish or the birds, because that's also part of our community and part of what we experience every day and what we care about every day. But corporations would like us to care lesser about that rather than the brands. So the consumers are also engaged and participating in this economy. Okay, technology is based. Now, this is something again that comes from, and I know I'm meant to imagine a very new world, but my imagination still comes from the world that I'm part of right now. And the world that I'm part of right now employs 2 million people in the footwear industry. And we see these people getting displaced when technologies are introduced. And I would love for a world where technology is paced such that they're always included in, whether it's a technological transformation or whether it's a transition into sustainability, that we can include them. I'm as big a fan of 3D printing as the next person because of all that it can do, all the waste that it can save. But just to give that as an example, right? Everyone having a 3D printer in their room is great. Being able to print out their own shoes or clothes is great. For us as small brands, what would be great is if 3D printing could be adapted to tooling. So instead of, paying heavily for molds and things like that, we are able to 3D print molds or lasts and then construct shoes in a more traditional way, which 2 million people over here depend on. So I do feel technology needs to be paced, keeping in mind artisanal value, preserving crafts and skills, and including the makers that depend on this industry currently. So big oil and its lobbyists are gone, materials are varied, and innovations are thriving. So again, there's some part of this is engineered. Some of these systems are engineered to be the way that they are right now. And I believe big oil and plastics is chief among them because of the lobbying culture. The materials permeated everywhere. Plastic was a great material for something that needed to be long-standing, but not for something that, it costs you $2 and gets thrown away, without even wearing it once. So once big oil and all of that is gone, you can imagine how varied the materials can be. They'll be locally relevant and locally sourced. And within all these local ecosystems, innovations are thriving. Everyone's doing it based on, say banana leaf fiber. Banana leaves are rampant in India. There's plenty of them around. So fiber being made from banana leaves, or leather being made from banana leaves over here, whereas some elsewhere it's another fruit or another vegetable that's contributing to it. Even within this new material economy, aging materials are considered fashionable, and circularity is prided. Our soil is healthier, and so are we. And I somehow imagine, and I hope for this to be part of our future. So we currently include agricultural waste in our products. But I imagine a sort of a vertical integration where it's almost seed to shoe. So you're cultivating what you're going to make your final shoe out of. And I would like to introduce the prototype at this stage because it kind of brings that out a little bit more. And then move on to the next slide, if that's okay. Yeah. So this is not an ideal prototype that I would show in a thing like this, but we are soon to be presenting our work in a small show at Fashion Week. So I am bringing something forward from there. It's only for your eyes only for the next few days. And then a week later, obviously more pictures will come out and then others can see it. So this is the prototype, okay? And this is currently, so our footbeds look like this, and our outsoles are also made from similar materials. But this currently is 96% bio-based in its entirety, and it is monomaterial. So it is not monomaterial in a very traditional sense of the word, but neither is any filament that's going into 3D plastics. There's a lot of multiple, things that still go into it. But the base is enough of a monomaterial to get recycled into the same material. So from the old base, we've recycled rubber into this sort of upper, okay? So this has about like 30 to 40% recycled content, 30 to 40% bio-based recycled content. That is about 10 to 15% recycled content. But it is, when this sort of comes out, of course, we can disassemble it and recycle it into other generations of the same material. And the upper kind of serves as a recycling thing for previous soles, right? But this is not made out of 3D. This is still a pretty artisanal product. There's stitching around here. There's stitching around here. There's minimal stitching just because this one is a little bit more minimal. But it is still an artisanal product that looks to achieve something similar to what, say, a 3D printing or a monomaterial foam plastic thing would do, right? So, so corporate interests are set aside. Makers are now upskilled. So I think maybe because of my background, I really think makers need to be included in all of these transitions. And with corporate training kind of gone, corporate training trains them on corporate agenda, the things that they want to push out, the innovations that they have sort of bought into. Whereas now makers are upskilled and trained to work in this new material economy, whether it's recycling or whether it's bio-based. It's something we also try to do. We didn't try and hire the top talent or anything. We tried upskilling all the artisans within our ecosystem, which may only be 5, 6, 7 of them, but they are now working with agricultural waste going into the soil rather than a plastic. So they're able to really be part of this transition, both from the point of view of less harm to their health when they're making the product, but also an understanding of what is going into it, when it doesn't come through as pellets and everything. So they're able to question the materials going into it and learn from that process. And hopefully that sort of leads to the next generation of makers that are able to furthermore, push that, and they become micro entrepreneurs. They're able to source these local materials and make and innovate within themselves. So I hope this is the fashion fictions program is a bit new to me, so I'm not, I love the worlds that the others created. I may not have let you dive into my world in quite the same way, but I hope this gives you an idea of what it is.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you very much, John. Yeah, I think some a really good perspective there on craftsmanship and community and the workers. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So from my visit to World 255, I want to start with what I found most surprising. And that's what has been touched on actually in some other worlds, is that there's no global recognized brands. With the big brands gone, all the businesses have been capped at 50 employees or 10 million in revenue. And that's also been effectively a cap on production. So with those constrictions, there's very few businesses that can produce more than maybe 50,000 pairs in a year. And to put that in perspective, Converse is currently producing around 100 million pairs per year. So there would be an explosion of about 10,000 or so brands to make up that production volume. And so what that would lead to is, I think, a pluriverse of footwear. And so these are some examples that are currently existing, but I can imagine there being many more thousands. Every large city, there's 1,000 cities with 5,000 people in the world. Every one of them could have their own Chuck Taylor styled Converse canvas sneakers. But they wouldn't be necessarily standardized. They would be all localized to the local maybe roots and local design influences. There would also be a change in the flows of who designs and who makes, with 90 or so % being made in Asia and especially China, as we've heard. And the designs mostly coming from the West. That would be flipped around, and that's why I've actually put the map upside down to give some perspective on just how different it would be if designs were coming from all different areas and production was happening in a decentralized manner. And with that, there would also be this kind of Western hegemony of culture that currently guides and comes from the top down in the biggest businesses. The sensibilities of fashion, they would change quite significantly in this world. We would be much more experimental. We'd be also returning to more traditional, maybe less economical approaches to footwear, things that are slower, take more time, as well as doing more of our own provisioning and creating our own types of footwear, experimenting with do-it-yourself options. In terms of the everyday experience of footwear, I think there'd be just much less pressure to consume. You wouldn't have the fast fashion cycle pushing out new footwear, new styles. So it'd be quite rare to see advertisements. And the small businesses that exist in this world, they're no longer competing against Nike's $4 billion marketing budget. So they're not forced to try and keep up on the treadmill of production. They can keep marketing spend to a minimum, mostly selling locally. They can be discovered in a more organic manner by those around them. I also imagine there would be kind of like a yellow pages or a local directory for footwear brands. So if someone's looking for a brand, they will see what's available in different regions, and they can choose from there um, when they're looking for a new pair. And there's also still going to be trends in this new world. I don't think that would disappear, but they'd be much slower in developing, and they would take a lot of time to spread across the world through all these small niches and small businesses. And another aspect is that the idea of fast fashion is viewed now as quite an ugly idea. It's from the past and it's very outdated. People are much more interested in investing in quality over quantity. The idea that a shoe could be disposable is now quite outlandish. Everyone's more interested in building a relationship with their shoes, in honoring the craftsmanship that was put into it. So resellability is actually the new trend, and it looks like it's sticking around. Most people are really interested in different ways of reselling. Here's some examples that you can see that currently exist, where you're reconstructing or making modular soles, putting on oversoles on top of your shoes. There would be a boom in innovation in the different ways that shoes could be resold. But why is this world so different? What exactly does this cap of business size have to do? And I made this graph based on my experience in World 255 that shows businesses have a totally different purpose when they're not seeking exponential growth and exponential or endless profits. They can grow much more steadily and slowly, and the end goal is to reach a maturity state, much like an old growth forest grows into a mature state, and then the most mature trees start nurturing the younger trees. I can see something similar where these brands, wherever they go within this size range, they don't necessarily have to go to the maximum size in the cap. Wherever they go, once they're at a steady state that works and is satisfying for them, then they will look to support other creators and other innovators. And so that's quite a contrast from the venture capital funding or the big finance funding that some of these brands that we've seen in recent years. I mean, just as a comparison, this is not a hyperbole, this exponential growth curve. Allbirds and On Running are a couple examples of footwear shoes that have actually grown even faster than this within 10 years. I think the scale of change is really quite profound. It's something to really think about how different that would be. So how would these businesses get their starts, though, if we don't have the whole funding ecosystem? Is another question we were looking at in this world. And I think the whole investment landscape would be totally different, because there would be no big profits for investors to be gambling on the next unicorn. There wouldn't really be a need for any big investment at all. It's actually been replaced by quite a sophisticated crowdfunding ecosystem. And it's much more bottom up. People who are interested in a certain brand, they can invest in that brand, and it actually doubles as a great marketing strategy. So these brands, without having investors that they need to serve, they're much more growth agnostic. They're not so worried about serving those interests. How can they maximize their returns and lose sight of the original missions? But I think one thing that also would need to be considered is coming back to the governance rights, is who has control. Because if we just break up businesses into small pieces and then someone's allowed to start controlling many of them, then you have a sort of loose conglomeration. So I think this world has grappled with that by not allowing voting rights for people who are outside the business. They can have other benefits for contributing, but they're not allowed to take control of where that business goes. So what is really stigmatized in this world is bigness. It's no longer seen as the best because of the power imbalance that it creates, because of the lack of transparency, a couple of ideas that we've already gone over, and also that the disconnection that a long, opaque global supply chain can make or layers of corporate hierarchy can really disconnect what's going on the ground from what's happening in the corporate office. And so that's another big factor that's different. And so I think one of the biggest questions that they had to grapple with in World 235 comes back to the workers. As they said, there's millions of garment workers and footwear workers, and a lot of them lost their jobs during the pandemic. Luckily, there was a coalition of union leaders, governments, researchers, and businesses that came together when they decided that when the movement came to cap business size, they decided they need a transition plan and they could capitalize on the degrowth that has already happened. So they predicted that with this shift to more of a quality over quantity and a culture of repair, that there would be a reduction of about 75% demand by 2030. So if we have 20 billion shoes being made around the time of the pandemic, that would drop to around 5 billion. So where are all those jobs going to go? That's really the big question. And so they came up with quite a radical plan, and it was called the 50-50 dissolution deal. So what happened was the shareholders of these big businesses, their shares weren't going to be worth that much because there was already going to be this cap on business size. So they agreed that they would cut a deal by donating 50% of their shareholdings to the workers in the supply chains. And then the other 50% was going to be bought from them via the workers and with government support. So this shifted the ownership. And then the second stage was to spin off these big brands into many thousands of small brands who are now employee owned. But still, they still were wondering, well, now we can't just have a bunch of small brands making 20 billion pairs of shoes. But we don't really need 20 billion pairs of shoes if they last longer and they're being repaired and people aren't over consuming. So they decided that they would reorganize around meeting social needs. So these small brands have spun off into other industries, into electrification, healthcare, regenerative farming, rewilding, climate proofing, anywhere that there was a societal need. So that is kind of my finale. I hope that brought another interesting perspective. The next stage is going to be some reflection. So we might just open it up to questions as well from the audience. But if not, we'll move on to some reflection questions. For anyone who has some initial thoughts they might like to share, maybe their sense of this exercise and what it has brought to their thinking.
It's a really nice exercise. Thank you for getting us to be a part of this. I wonder if a world like this is something that's already in making right now. Like, is this something that we're just imagining? Or are there parts where it's already begun? Because these ideas, especially all the speakers, feels like they're already sort of working in this manner, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, I think if I'll just take that, I think that there's definitely pockets of change happening, and I think a lot of people on this call are very interested in bringing that to fruition. But I think at least for me, the idea of imagining it and trying to, in a more free way, without boundaries of our current world, was actually quite difficult to think beyond what we're already doing. So that was quite interesting.
It's been really amazing. Like the thoughts are I know it was in imagination, but it was so much, a lot of it felt like it is achievable and it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Sorry, can I just add also the opposing forces? Right now, we might be trying to create these new worlds and build them with what we are building, but the opposing forces that we are met with, they're monumental, like, it's like moving mountains. I think in these imaginary worlds, all that is a little less tedious.
Yeah, if I can just add, so many of the ideas that I saw and the ones that I also presented many of those are actually already happening. The issue, the biggest frustration is, especially with the big brands, is that they they do all these amazing R&Ds, and they launch these amazing sustainable products, but they fail miserably to scale those ideas. And so they remain, sadly, just as an idea. And those fantastic shoes tend to represent a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the entire production line. This is the biggest issue. And this is also part of the issue with greenwashing. So yeah, so in answer to your question is that, you know, we have huge amount of solutions out there, and the main challenge is to actually implement them and scale them to take over, you know, all the sort of nasty ways of producing shoes.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is like, the wonderful thing about this story is that there's this tipping point which causes this this wonderful policy of capping the size of companies, and then if something like that is going to happen, and what causes it to happen, and then how does that, so there's, with this story it's the pandemic, but we need something else. There needs to be some kind of social tipping point that causes politicians to actually do something really drastic. How do we do that? and it worries me what that kind of incident is that would cause enough of a upswell in this desire for change and for politicians to actually listen.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna like just answer or talk about what's the issues that Sarah raised about events that might lead to something like this, or might lead to a new kind of world. And one of the things that I was going to mention is that the places where the footwear industry has been shut down that are not the pandemic is when there have been like enormous strikes in the footwear industry. And I think sometimes like we forget about those. So like at the Taiwanese company Yen, where there was a strike of like 400,000 people, which shut down the factories and lasted for like many weeks, and they faced great police brutality. And I can imagine a situation, I mean, the strike, they got what they wanted, they got all their demands for better social security and so on. And it is possible for me to imagine a world where that strike spreads and the other UN facilities also went on strike. In like South Asia, I think it's been incredible to see, like the Sri Lankan government being overthrown and people invading the presidential palace. And of course, more recently, the student-led uprising in Bangladesh is like astonishing, and all comes out of, the economic uncertainty and frustration that people have been having with their government. So I mean, I do think like it's a certainty for me that the fashion industry and the footwear industry will change, and either it changes in a really horrible way due to climate collapse, or it is possible that we do change it in the way that people have been talking about today, and that it comes from a positive place and is people led, and undoubtedly like global south led as well, because that's where the real change is taking place at the moment.
Yeah, if I may say something about that as well, I think it's important to stay positive on this, because I feel that a lot of things discussed here are sort of waiting for external change. And I really do believe that there's such a power in civil disobedience or really changing systems from within. So instead of waiting, every revolution has always started with a small group of people that just set change in place. And I think that's the way also to just at least get going.
Just add one little thing. So yeah, on the positive side, there are some very wide collaborations happening as we speak. They just starting to emerge. So there's a group, for example, which is led by MIT researchers in the States. They call the Footwear Collective, and they've managed to bring on board about a dozen medium to large size shoe companies to work together to create all sorts of solutions with regard to circular economy. And I know it's not in line with our specific world of sort of with capped size businesses, but you know, I think it can create a move towards a more responsible production, and also some of the issues that of overproduction will also hopefully will hopefully produce less and less shoes. I mean, the fact is that you know, we have this target to meet, which is to halve our emissions by 2030, and so far our emissions have only gone completely the other way. So something much more radical has to happen. So hopefully we'll start to put our skates on and yeah, work towards a sort of a more radical shift.
So we've run short on time and won't be getting to any more of the reflection questions as we had originally planned, but I've put them up here for everyone to have a think on. What footwear or fashion would look like and feel like without big business? So those questions are: how far away is this world? What parts of it would you like to be real? And what actions would be needed to make these parts real? You can also broaden this reflection to other sectors or the global economy. I think it's really profound to think about how things could be different without such centralized corporate power dominating business, politics, and really our everyday lives. I also want to say it's really special to be able to bring such a pioneering group of thinkers and doers together to explore different perspectives on other possibilities and how things can be different. So thank you everyone for being here, listening, and everyone for sharing and just exploring. For anyone that would like to explore further, you can check out the work of all of our speakers at their websites, which we have listed here. Tansy has a great newsletter that you can sign up for, as well as find the books she's written there. You can keep up with Chani, Lily, Stefan, and Lot, and Sven on their websites as they put alternatives into action through their businesses and projects. You can also see hundreds of other fictional worlds that have already been created at fashionfictions.org, or you can learn to create your own and submit it. It's quite a fun exercise. You can also visit Cobbled to see how we're trying to work towards a slower and more decentralized footwear industry based on smaller businesses. Lastly, I suggest checking out the other events that are taking place as part of the Global Fashioning Assembly 2024. All of them will be recorded and on YouTube. There's 19 other events, so it's definitely worth having a look to see what might interest you. That is all. Thank you.